there's such a significant shift in the West against Israel that the Zionist lobby are ever more frantic to try to pull people back into line, and also to use the concern about immigration and the hostility to Muslims as a way to drive the British back to support Israel in practical terms as well as just in political terms. And vast amounts of money have been thrown at this now. So this is a good place to bring up the fact this isn't just the Zionists. The only way that America can survive their coming catastrophe is if they find an extra 20 or 30 or 40 million skilled, assimilable immigrants. Here we need to come on to Professor Betts because this actually fits in. Well, he's more than just a scholar. Now, a few months ago, he started going on all the main right-wing podcasts and so on, and then being picked up by the likes of Tommy, saying there's a civil war coming with the Muslims and the rest of us. And he said in more and more extreme terms over the last few months. So he's endorsing an online document which is positively psychotic.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, friends, and the foes out there, and welcome to another episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Diri Hussain. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to remind all the avid podcast listeners that you can find this show and all 4 seasons on all the major audio platforms. And if you're tuning in via YouTube, don't be cheeky, do remember to click subscribe to the 5 Pillars YouTube channel. Today's guest is someone who's a British icon of the political right or the far right, a controversial figure himself, the former leader of the British Nationalist Party, who was also a member of the European Parliament, currently with the Knights Templars. That's none other than Nick Griffin. Nick,
hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
How's things?
Everything's good. Looking forward to what I hope will be a really interesting and important discussion.
A lot's happened since the last time we met, and I wanted to kick today off by asking you, why did our podcast from December 2023 piss off so many people? And just to mention some of the people, Michael Gove, of course, Tel Aviv Tommy Robinson, the Board of Deputies, the Jewish Chronicle, the Community Security Trust, Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, Hope Not Hate, to name but a few people who were quite triggered when we did our podcast. Why do you think that is?
Well, obviously, you had to start with the Z word. This is a Zionist issue. But there's a couple of other things, I think, which are slightly sort of above and beyond that. So, first of all, in the end, with all the elites, one of the attractive reasons for mass immigration and for having people like you and me at each other's throats is that if the peasants with the pitchforks are busy hating the peasants with the torches, then no one bothers, or no one is able to resist the exploitation of all the peasants by the elite. So there's that. Then I think, especially with some, possibly even with Gove, with some elements, the fact is that war is big business. Hate is big business. And the idea that nationalists and Muslims can sit down and talk together and reach some agreement, which, if it actually grew, would make wars a harder thing, that's a threat to the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex, particularly the Americans, but also in Britain, just as the Zionist lobby buys politicians, so does the military-industrial complex. They're all, especially in the United States, but here too, they have politicians on their payroll because war and rumours of war make them money. So there's that. So the minute you get people like us sitting down, it becomes potentially a threat.
Can I just show you what Gove did say?
Yeah, sure, absolutely so.
Troublingly, there is also evidence that some Islamists and extreme right-wing groups and others who seek to tear our society apart are working together to maximise the reach of their message and cause.
So that was Michael Gove speaking in Commons, indirectly referring to our sit-down.
Yep.
And here's Stephen Yaxley Lennon, Tommy Robinson, Tel Aviv Tommy 10 shekels, whatever tickles your fancy.
It's a lot more than 10 shekels.
Is it more than $7,000?
It's a lot more than that, I'm sure.
Okay, the videos are not loading up. Once they load up, I'll show it to you. But yeah, so we've got Gove, we've got Tommy, we've got Hope Not Hate, we've got the Israeli lobby, the pro-Israel lobby.
The biggest one, Rishi Sunak, stood on the steps of number 10 when George Galloway got elected, and specifically mentioned me by name. Yeah. And again, the fact that the far right and the Muslims are working together. Before we get on to the Zionist thing, there's one other factor, I think, that particularly the Liberals are upset by. And as you know, they've got an agenda to transform this country and the peoples living in this country, with the most obvious example being the LGBT dogma. And there's one thing that could stop that, and that is if Muslim parents and Christian and...
Sorry, Nick.
Yeah.
The mad alliance that I've seen develop is they're in bed now with the Muslims.
Really?
But yet they're all sort of like sitting down doing talks together. You see Nick Griffin sitting with 5 pillars. 5 pillars want a caliphate and Islamic domination. Nick Griffin hates everyone that's not white. But yet here they are coming together. They're now coming together, aren't they? They're now joining together. Yeah. They're now joining together. It's mad. You now see Nick Griffin sitting down with radical Dilly Hussein. They both want supremacy. He wants white supremacy. He wants Islamic supremacy. And here they are together coming. They basically all coming together just because they hate Jews and everything's the Jews' fault. Yeah, that's what's brought them together now. But at this time,
So, and he's mentioned our podcast a few times.
Yes.
On multiple platforms. This wasn't
So currently, I think he's obsessed with it.
Yeah, he is.
He keeps on going on about it. So just to finish off that point, that's a friendly contact and agreement to work together between Muslims and Christians and ordinary parents in this country. That's the one thing that could stop the LGBTQ rampage through our school system. So the Liberals, I think, are particularly worried about that. Overall, all the people you've mentioned and so on, and the podcast that's on, it's all funded by the Zionist lobby for the primary reason that they want British taxpayers' money, British arms and British political support for Israel. And it's particularly difficult when for the last 2 years, more and more people have understood that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. So it's done immense damage to Israel's PR around the world. So they're pushing that, and having me and you sitting down and having someone like me saying this is a genocide, this is wrong, that's something they really don't want, because they are on very weak ground now. You know, so many people have woken up to this.
When I picked you up from the cafe down the road, you had a keffiyeh on. You didn't have that on 2 years ago. What's happened?
No, I didn't. Well, I would rather not wear the keffiyeh. I would rather wear something which symbolised and everyone knew was a symbol of a indigenous British resistance to Zionist occupation. And we have a Zionist political occupation in Britain, a Zionist media occupation here, every bit as much as Gaza and the West Bank and so on. So if there was something I could wear which said, I'm a Brit and I oppose this, I would rather wear that, because I am a Brit. Keffiyeh is not my thing. But as a matter of fact, it's the only thing that people recognise as saying that I stand with Palestine. And I have to for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's the right thing to do. It's simply grotesquely un-Christian to support the murder of innocent civilians, especially children, especially when some of them are Christian children. But regardless of that, they're all innocent, the Muslim ones as well. So that's a monstrous thing. But there's also, from a British nationalist point of view, an indigenous British point of view, a very practical, almost selfish point, that as long as our elites carry on smashing up Muslim countries and wrecking them, we're going to end up with more refugees. With the greatest respect to you, I don't want any more Muslims in this country. But of course they're going to come. If they're being in the case of Gaza, you've got a choice of staying there, being blown to pieces, or starved to death. And then in due course, they'll come to the West, because the Israelis have made it very clear that that's where they want them to go. So it's in our self-interest, quite apart from the moral position, to stop that slaughter and to have a decent future for Muslim Arabs in their own homeland.
Nick, if I may respectfully push back just on one point, right? And I've had this conversation with others who lean towards a similar direction as you. And you know, when you talk about a Zionist-occupied government, or ZOG, which is a common term within certain circles and spheres, whilst I'm not disputing the vast power and influence that the Israeli lobby yields in Western governments, particularly the US and the UK and so forth, I feel that sometimes, or many of the times, it seems as if we're only blaming a supposed group of evil Jews that have some sinister plan. It's as if we take responsibility and accountability from the elite amongst the white Brits or white Europeans, or even now more so the Arab regimes. When we I just find that when we say Zionist occupied government, we take, are you including, let's say, non-Jewish elements of the elite?
Well, first of all, plenty of non-Jews are Zionists. They have been from Winston Churchill through to Michael Gove and so on. Secondly, I'm speaking here about Zionism. You have to, if you look at the number of Labour MPs who are members of the Labour Friends of Israel, if you look at the number of them who are in receipt of money from that lobby, it is very, very powerful. But you're absolutely right, and I constantly say to people on the right about this, that if you're obsessed with the Jews, you miss the whole point. Now, a classic example is George Soros, who, so shortly before Charlie Kirk was murdered, he started noticing the fact that George Soros, he said, these left-wing Jews who are behind the LGBT thing and various things that ordinary people on my side of the fence do not like. But there was a wiki dump very, very recently which proved conclusively that Soros's Open Society Foundation has been working like that for 50 years with the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, the National Endowment for Democracy is a CIA front. So everyone who's been looking at George Soros, who's a particularly ugly specimen of humanity, saying, look at this wicked evil Jew, they're missing the point. It's a deliberate thing, I think, that while people are looking at him, they're not seeing the bigger picture, that this is the American deep state, which is about money, not about Judaism or Islam or Christianity or whatever. It's about money and greed. And it's very convenient for them when people say, yes, it's only the Jew, it's all the Jews. You're quite right. But when we're talking about the Zionist influence, and especially the whole Tommy Robinson's a cipher for something much, much bigger, we'll probably come onto this in more depth later on. There's vast sums of money in America and Britain and throughout Western Europe being poured in to creating what the left would say is Islamophobia.
What do you call it?
I would say it's aiming to focus all the resentment, which is quite understandable to me, and legitimate resentment at the mass immigration that's been imposed on our countries. It's focusing it all against Muslims.
No, what I'm saying, if you don't like the term Islamophobia, what do you describe an unjust or disproportionate fear and hate mongering towards the Muslims?
The word you just used will be fine. Okay. But I think that Islamophobia, it's a sort of cant term that's used by the left. Yeah. And for me to say it, people think, well, what on earth?
I'm not entirely. I am not entirely comfortable with the term, at least the way it's been framed and coined by some. But I just wonder to myself, what other term would you use? Yeah,
it's a little bit like, so it's the flip side of anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism. It has a literal meaning, but it's also being radically abused in order to make any criticism of either the Zionist state or the intense racism in some parts of Judaic religious teaching. It's forbidden. You can't touch it.
So the IHRA definition is about all of that, isn't it?
Yeah,
basically.
And I would say they're the same. I don't accept that I'm an anti-Semite, although I criticise and always have done Zionism and the racism which is within parts of Jewish teaching. I don't accept I'm an Islamophobe, even though I'm critical of the Islamification of Britain. And as you know, I've talked and caused all sorts of trouble with discussing the grooming issue 20 years ago, well before anybody else did. And I'm not going to say I've changed my mind. It's a problem which came largely from the Muslim community, from the Pakistani community in Britain. I think now a lot of it actually is historic, because women, especially in the Women Against Grooming group, I know several of them, and they said, no, the problem with grooming now, it's still going on, but it's the very recently arrived single boat people, men, quite a few of whom are nominally Christian Africans or animist Africans. They're not all Muslims. And they say, no, what was happening with the Pakistani community, it seems to be in the past. For various reasons, which we can go to that.
So why does Musk keep bringing it up? Why does JD Vance keep bringing it up? Why is it resurfaced in the way that it has, referring to mainly old cases?
I think it's, to be fair with someone from America, even someone very powerful and important, they're also very busy, so they will hear or see. Because it's on social media, there's another case when 10 Pakistani men in a northern town or whatever are on trial for grooming. So they it's still going on. In fact, most of those are now historical cases. So it's because it's something that was being done 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Absolutely right, they should be brought to justice. And it's unavoidable, I suppose, that because it's coming to court now, it's covered now. But it is, to a fair extent now, it's something that's from the historic past. Therefore, while it's right that justice is done, it's wrong and dangerous that it's being used by forces that wish my people no good, as well as your people, to create tensions in this country on behalf of partly the Zionist thing, as we've already talked about. But I've come to the conclusion, perhaps it's better later on in the show, or we can talk about it now. I've come to the conclusion that there's something deeper and bigger than Zionism in what is now a very clear attempt to create a civil war in Britain between the Muslims and the rest of us.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the crown, the crescent and pitchfork. We're going to talk about Professor Betts and some of his takes later on. But linked to this very theme, let's talk about the significant events that have taken place since we last met in the course of the last 2 years. We've had a genocide in Gaza for 2 years. The UN, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the Association of International Genocide Scholars, you name it. Pretty much every professional and expert in the field has concluded that there is a genocide, with a plausible genocide case happening in the ICJ. And, people's general innate humanity, the very foundations of it have been shaken. Yeah. Perhaps previously you were indifferent to people being oppressed and killed that looked different to you, but for the first time in my 37 years of life, I've seen that there are huge numbers of white Westerners that have woken up to what's happening abroad, the very unhealthy and questionable proximity between the Israeli lobby and their respective governments, the influence they yield in policy-making circles and so forth. We obviously saw the proliferation of Palestine flags at marches week in, week out in certain neighborhoods, whether it's in Ireland or in the Muslim majority areas here, you see Palestine flags being waved. We had Southport, the horrific, tragic incident of Southport, where 3 girls were killed, young girls were killed, many others injured, and then we had the riots. Tell me your thoughts on last summer's unrest.
The British have sat and quietly grumbled about all sorts of things that are illegally done to our country, but particularly immigration, just really across the board for decades. And all they did was grumble. And then in a few areas where it was becoming a particular issue, at different times, they turned in the 70s just electorally to the National Front, then they turned to the British National Party. But through all that time, pretty much grumbling is all that that's as far as they've got in their heads. The last 2 years, and it was partly to do with Southport, that was a sort of final straw. Now, obviously, the killer was
born in Wales,
but born in Wales. Well, the liberal elite and the police and the media so catastrophically mishandled that by trying to pretend that, first of all, saying he was a Welshman. Yep, come on, it was grotesque. And then trying to say, well, okay, but he's a choir boy, he's a lovely lad, and all the rest of it. And the attempt to just keep the truth from the people, even not showing his picture when they had it. It was only for a few days, but people know that they've been lying to us for years. But this was just a lie too far. So I think that was a key factor in what's gone on. I suppose, especially to your majority of your audience are British-born Muslims. So I've got to say that I don't know whether you're aware of it yet, you are now dealing with a completely different British people to the ones that you've grown up with, to the people who were here 3 years ago. Something flipped in the head. And you can see it, Southport was a large part of it, but it was only the straw that broke the camel's back. If it had happened as a one-off, people would have thought that's disgusting, it's disgraceful. But it's just another lie, another appalling crime, by basically the people that we're forced to pay for. So it flipped. You can see it in two things, but these are only just little snapshots which show what's gone on. There's the whole Raise the Colours flag protest, which...
I feel that was a response to the Palestine flag.
It was...
I mean, Tommy admitted that.
Yeah, it's partly a response to the Palestine flag, but no, it's more than that. It's... so like my village, little village in Shropshire, now looks like a village in County Down in Northern Ireland. There's flags everywhere. And I know the lads have put those up and so on. And really, they haven't got a political clue. But it's a friend of mine, very, very highly regarded by me, chap in Birmingham, who used to be very much involved in the British National Party. He's in his 60s, but he goes to the gym quite a lot. He's early retired. And he said that just in the last few months, all the other, and because of the time of day he goes, they're also all older men. He said they've all flipped, and he described it as tribalisation. He said in the last few months they've been tribalised. It's now all about the British, or particularly the English, and the St George flags and all the rest of it. And so, no, it's not, again, the Palestinian flags, it's a bit of a trigger. These foreign flags in our streets.
Yeah, trigger more so than the sole cause.
But it's only a trigger, and if there wasn't already a deep feeling of uncertainty and unease about what's going on and the idea that we're losing this country, because it's a large part of it, as Professor Betts says, it's actually a demographic thing. As the massively white boomer generation starts to die off, it's leaving a gap in our population, and all of a sudden the balance, the population balance is changing. So it's partly that. But for all these reasons, the flag thing, it's absolutely huge in the mentality of the British people. But it just shows the change. It isn't the change itself. So that's part of it. The other thing is the staggering rise of reform in the opinion polls relative to the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. Now, Farage isn't a nationalist, he's a populist. He'll promise all sorts of things, or implied promises that he's going to sort all sorts of things out. If they get to power, it'll be on the back, just as the Brexit vote was a vote against immigration, far more than anything else, about taking back control to take control of our borders back.
How do you feel about Nigel, the man who has been on camera saying that he was responsible for the downfall of the British National Party?
And in that, he tells the truth, largely. That was by far the most effective way that we were stopped, by the BBC promoting him and what was then UKIP. So I've got no time for him. And most of all, he will get elected from people who just say, I just want my country back, and this is a chance. There's no possibility of that, because in the end, he's a creature of capitalism, absolutely, as a former merchant banker, financier, and so on. And the simple fact is, demographically, we can't turn the clock back like that. It's now not possible, unfortunately.
Are you of that position? It's too late.
Yes, we're going to move into something different, and we have to discuss. Obviously, there's a huge amount of fear about what it's going to be. We have to discuss sensibly what it's going to be and how we can try to make the thing work. But he will get elected. If he is elected, it'll be on the basis people think he's going to turn it all round. At the very most, he might stop a few of the illegals coming in. It's not that difficult across the channel.
I think he'll address the legal migration.
And he might even send back a few criminals and a few radical Islamists. A few. But it'll be like Meloni in Italy, who came to power on the basis of going to stop immigration, reverse it and so on. And she's slowed down very drastically the number coming across the Mediterranean illegally. But she's basically opened Italy's borders to huge numbers coming in legally, many of them being Indian Hindus. And you're talking hundreds of thousands.
Well, same in the UK.
And Farage will do the same.
In 2023, 230,000 Indians came here legally.
Yes.
The highest number, quite significantly more than any other country.
Yeah, absolutely. And Farage is there to do that. So it's partly a safety valve thing. And by they're trying to focus everyone's attention on Muslims. And I think that to a degree, they've realised, post the Gaza thing, that actually throughout Western Europe, that here is a population which isn't malleable either to the Zionist agenda or to the modernist agenda, the LGBT, etc., etc. And they're committed to having a multicultural, multiracial future for Europe, partly for ideological reasons, partly because it's capitalism. We have a fiat money banking system based on usury. So money is created as an interest-bearing debt. Unless you have a growing economy overall, the whole thing will crumble because you can't pay back the principal and the the interest without having further loans and further interest and so on. And it will crumble because we've got this demographic catastrophe. Now, all the white racists say it's a deliberate white genocide. It's not really the case, but it's going on in places like China and Japan and Singapore as well. It's basically a problem of industrialization, consumerism, feminism, capitalism wanting cheap labour, and even before they
choosing profits of the people,
even before they brought in immigrants as cheap labour, they were forcing women into the workplace as well. You put those things together with contraception, and you're always, in fact, going to have a demographic catastrophe. But people have no idea how serious this is now. So and it's something which Muslims need to be aware of because it's happening to your people as well here. It's happening. So Bangladesh, once hugely fertile, the latest population figures out of Bangladesh, it's about 1.9 children per woman of childbearing age. That's below replacement.
Yeah, you used to be 4.8 about 10 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. And the same is happening even in Pakistan. And the same is happening in your community. And I would say that you haven't yet begun to see what's going to happen because I don't know how long ago it's been, but in quite recent times, the Pakistani and Bangladeshi community in Britain have moved from being pretty much the bottom of the heap in socioeconomic terms, really, to sending far more of your kids to university than certainly white working class children, but increasingly just generally, which is all well and good. The minute you send girls to university, you've lost them. Because at most, they're going to, at best, they're going to have their career and then come back and start having kids at the age of 35. By which time it's too late. So this is going to happen to you as well. So the thing about the demographics is this, that a breeding generation is about 25 years. Our living generation is 70, 80. Obviously, this is why you can't see it for a while because all the old people who are past childbearing age are still alive.
It creeps up on you later.
So yeah, indeed. So it grows, but it creeps up on you later.
Italy is an example. Now, yeah.
So if you have one child on average per woman of childbearing age, in 25 years your population doesn't halve, but the next breeding generation halves. And we had that started about 1970. 25 years for my population, you're just behind the curve. So by 1995, we've had one generation where the average is not much more than one. Then we've had another 25 years since then, the same thing. So we've gone from 100% breeding population to 50% in the first generation. We're already through the second one. We're 25%. We're partway to the third. So our population, our breeding population, is going to be 12.5% of what it was when I was born. That's the scale of the change, and you cannot have that collapse in your population in a capitalist society based on usury. Therefore, they have to do something about it. And the only thing that they can think of, obviously, they should simply ban abortion, stop contraception, tax childless couples and all the rest of it. You can't do that in a democracy. So the only thing they can do is to try and bring in people from abroad, which, if they're people who are fully assimilable and going to come and work, it could be done. I wouldn't want it because we in the end are just swamped in our own country, but I can understand that. Increasingly in Europe, in fact, the only place that they've got to bring people from is sub-Saharan Africa, because they're the only ones with a really healthy human breeding population still. And I don't think that is remotely compatible with our society.
So let me just ask you a couple of questions related to all of that. If I had to ask you, what is the ballpoint figure of the average white Brit who you described as switched?
Yeah.
What would you put that percentage at?
In the working class, so not the ones who sit on their backsides just claiming the dole and drinking special brew or whatever, it's basically the best part of 100%. It's all white van man. It's all the people who actually make the country tick in many ways. From the population as a whole, it's getting on for half of the electorate, half of the people who actually vote.
Are we assuming those who will either vote Tories or Reform?
They're the ones, not many are going to vote Tory. They're the ones who are going to vote Reform. But the interesting thing...
A third of the people?
So a third of the people who are going to vote Reform, yeah. So that's a third of the voters. The interesting thing is out of the people who don't vote, and there's a very large number of people not even registered to vote. And from personal experience, we ran one campaign up in a town in Cumbria where we really worked two small areas. And we registered, in the space of 6 months' work, we registered 800 more people in a small town to vote because they were our hardcore supporters. So, in fact, many of the people who are most against immigration, most hostile to Muslims, they're not even registered to vote. So they're not going to show up in the next general election, but they're a number more. So my guess is at least half the British population are now in their own heads fighting mad. Now, if it actually comes to a fight, lots of them will run away. Many of them say, I'll fight. For heaven's sake, they're 70, they've got diabetes, they're fat as hell. They couldn't fight sleep, let alone a group of young Muslims. But in their heads, they want to fight and so on, and they really have had enough.
How much, and the next question I was going to ask was, you spoke about Muslim countries being kind of behind the curve. If you look
in demographic terms.
In demographic terms, yes, there is a decline in birth rate. There is. I mean, Turkey's hitting a very worrying number. A lot of Muslim countries are. But if you still look at the top 30 countries in the world that have a birth rate under 1.6, the vast majority would be European countries, Western countries.
In population terms, when you throw China into the equation among the ones committing demographic suicide, it's not just a white problem.
If you put China into any equation, it changes that.
It changes the balance.
It changes the balance of everything.
A wee bit. Yeah, no, absolutely so. Which is partly because we were the first ones into industrialisation and feminism.
So do you think it's linked to industrialisation and feminism?
It's partly linked to industrialisation and feminism. And then you've got the fact that there's certain specific elites.
Nothing about the Muslim world being resistant to these things.
No, people with faith are resistant to this. So there's only one common denominator for people who have a healthy birth rate. And that's faith.
It's religion.
And the only secular organisation which has tried to do something about it was Nazi Germany. And they only had 10 years to do it, but they only managed to get the birth rate up to 2.7. The only people who have a proper birth rate are either fundamentalist Muslims, fundamentalist Jews, or fundamentalist Christians. And the highest birth rate of any population in the entire world are the Amish and Anabaptists of America and South America, who have 8 or 9 children per family.
Yeah, so Niger is at 7.4 at the moment.
Yeah, but no, white people are the highest of the lot in the entire world. Not that many of them. In 100 years' time, other things being equal, America will be an Amish country.
Interesting.
That's just the way that the geometric progression of demographics works.
When you say fundamentalists, do you just mean practicing?
Practicing, fundamentalists is a little bit of a shorthand, like anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. It's a little bit of a lazy, short way. It means it's a bit more than practicing. It's practicing with a real, quite intense commitment. After all, say in Israel, the ordinary Israelis have one of the highest birth rates, probably the highest birth rate in the secular world, but they are left behind by the hardcore, ultra-religious Jews. The same in America. The the birth rate of ordinary white Americans is pretty pathetically low. They still go to church, or in Northern Ireland. All the ones, the Catholic community is an awful mess. In the loyalist areas, the churches are full to the brim. They're believing Christians. They go to church every week, but they haven't got that extreme, in one way, or real closeness to the Bible that it says, go forth and multiply, and children are equivocal. Make sure you've got equivocal, and so on. And so they're Christian, they're practicing Christians, but it's more than that. So the easiest label is fundamentalist.
Yeah. So look, what you're describing in Arabic, what we would call in Arabic, is tawakkul. It's having entire trust in Allah. Mm-hmm. That children are not seen as a financial commodity to save up for. Yep. God will look after them.
Yep.
If God will bring them to life, God will foresee their sustenance.
Yeah.
You just ensure you do the best job as a parent.
Yes, it's precisely the same in the Bible.
Okay,
absolutely so.
But that conception amongst Muslims is pretty much mainstream. Even though the birth rate is dropping, the mindset is still there.
Yeah.
It's still uncommon to hear Muslim married couples, second generation, third generation, to be discussing finances before having a kid.
Yeah.
Now I know there'll be patriots out there who will say, well, that's because you rely on the dole. I said, look, I think Britain should incentivise motherhood.
Yep.
Incentivise motherhood.
Well, I say to them, well, look, if you're worried about the fact that, if you can't afford kids, but all these Muslims, they're having lots of kids and they're getting the doll, well, do the same thing.
I think the biggest contribution that any white, native, indigenous Brit or Englishman, Scotsman, Irishman can do until their desired dream of remigration happens, if it ever happens, and we're going to talk about that, is to have kids.
Absolutely.
And have kids within the institution of marriage.
To have kids within the institution of marriage and to rear them right. I've come to the conclusion, so look, when I was younger and talking about this, you only think as a younger man, you think just in terms of your children. I've seen a significant number of people who've had a healthy number of children, but they've been brought up just with the television and all the rest of it, and they do not have children themselves. And actually, we're responsible, I think, for not just our children, also the grandchildren. You can't be held responsible for further than that. That's up to future generations, and it's the will of God or whatever. But it's a matter of, it's not just enough to have children, you have to rear them right. And the fundamentals of rearing them right is that they're going to get married and have children and rear them right as well.
How much of the developments we've been seeing in the UK, the political developments in the UK, whether it be the meteoric catapulting of Tommy back into the political discourse, pretty much the mainstreaming of him besides all the kind of legacy media platforms, he is now, without a shadow of a doubt, the poster boy of the right in the UK. Whether you hate him or love him or lump him, whatever, that's just a plain fact. Irrespective, I mean, he thinks he got 3 million, but it's somewhere between 100 to 150,000 people in the United Kingdom rally. And that's a sizable number. It's a sizable number.
I put it more like several other people, more like 400,000. Certainly not the million.
No,
but
we've seen what a million looks like.
You know what that exactly?
Yeah, we saw it with Iraq, and we've seen what 500,000 looks like. We've seen it with Palestine week in and week out. But regardless of the number,
we saw it with the fox hunting, because the one time previously that the British have turned out by the hundreds of thousands was to defend the right to hunt foxes.
How much of all this that we're seeing, as well as the raise the colours, unite the kingdom, the anti-Muslim, anti-immigration rhetoric, as if that is the only thing that's concerning the Brits, and this is the only issue, even if it's the main issue. I'm sure all sensible, level-headed minded people would say it's not the only issue. How much of these developments do you think is linked to the significant shift in public opinion within the West against Israel?
It's the other side of it. It's because there's such a significant shift in the West against Israel that the Zionist lobby are ever more frantic to try to pull people back into line. And also to use the concern about immigration and the hostility to Muslims as a way to drive the British back to support for Israel in practical terms, as well as just in political terms. So it's a very major thing, and vast amounts of money have been thrown at this now. So this is a good place to bring up the fact this isn't just the Zionists. Obviously, it's the Zionist lobby behind the Tommies and a vast range of all this alt media stuff, and you can pick them all out. Kissing, the Lotus Eaters, all of them. But then you get to GB News. Now, GB News is something I think rather different, and GB News is now the motor of this thing of enormous appeal and power. The BBC is sidelined in terms of producing, giving people their news and the opinions on it amongst ordinary Brits. Now, Paul Marshall, the founder of GB News, is a hedge fund magnate whose original business was started with a $50 million loan from George Soros. And he was a supporter of the Liberal Democrats and so on. The man's, he's not Jewish. He's actually significantly Christian. He's a Christian, a classic Christian WASP, if in American terms. But nevertheless, he started the business, which is now funding all of this, started with $50 million from the bogeyman, George Soros. So there's something strange. There's something strange there. And then the holding company, which owns GB News, is a company called Legatum. which is based in Britain, but also heavy investment from the United Arab Emirates, right? And it's not. So why is this thing pushing this? And it costs, Marshall put £43 million in the last financial year into subsidising GB News. So this thing, it's not making money. It's a loss maker. It's being subsidised. And I thought, well, it's just a Zionist thing. When you look, no, okay. Like many of the WASP elites, he's very close to the Zionist position, the banks and all the rest of it. It is all sort of interconnected. But there's something strange going on here. Here we need to come on to Professor Betts because this actually fits in.
That's true.
So I don't know what proportion of your audience will know about him.
No, so Professor Betts is a scholar in King's College London. Yeah. You tell the people a bit more about him.
Right. Well, he's more than just a scholar. He's the head of the war and something rather sociological type faculty there. And King's College London has a special relationship with the British Ministry of Defence. Again, with the figure of some 42 million contract to provide all the political and sort of geopolitical education for the officer class, for the British military intelligence, and for high-level civil servants. And he's a key figure in that. Now, a few months ago, he started going on all the main right-wing podcasts and so on, and then being picked up by the likes of Tommy, saying there's a civil war coming with the Muslims and the rest of us. And his analysis, now, whether it's right or wrong, we must come on to. So
Professor David Betts, who in the Department of War Studies at King's College London.
Yeah. So his position is there's going to be a civil war, and he says that because it's not just Britain, but also France, Belgium, Germany, Sweden, there's so many countries unstable, according to him, with this Muslim others divide, that it's going to kick off in one of them. When it does, it will spread. So therefore, he says basically it's a racing certainty. We can have a civil war within the next 5 years. Now, if he'd said that, and he was just speaking off the top of his own head, that would have been very rapidly stopped. Someone would have had a word with him. So he can't be saying this, but he's continued saying it. And he's said in more and more extreme terms over the last few months. So the latest stuff he's coming out with, he's endorsing an online document which is positively psychotic about what it's no longer a prediction of civil war. It's telling the side which he describes as Pitchfork, the indigenous Brit, it's telling them how to fight it. And actually also telling them, if you read it carefully, it's basically telling them, look, as long as you start this, you're going to win. For reasons A, B, C, and D. I don't think it's right. But
Crown, Crescent, Pitchfork.
That's it.
By a gentleman called El Ingles.
Yes. It's to be found on a website, The Gates of Vienna, which I fingered back in 2012. It was very close to the early stages of the Tommy Robinson thing. It was created by the exact same Centre for Vigilant Freedom, which was one of the sub-things run by a man called Frank Gaffney, who was a gopher for Dick Cheney. So, yes, it's Zionist neocon, but it's much closer to the American deep state than, say, the multimillionaire Likudniks who now back Tommy and the Heritage Foundation, etc., etc. So there's something quite deep going on here.
Brothers and sisters and friends, I see that you're enjoying the content. How come you've not clicked subscribe to the 5 Pillars YouTube channel? And if you're watching via Rumble, how come you've not subscribed on our Rumble channel? If you like the content, you like the guests, you like what we're talking about, it's absolutely inexcusable and cheeky for you not to click subscribe. Thank you and Jazakallah khair. So just on this document, I mean, I've had a read and it's sinister stuff. I mean, it goes into details about weapons, access to weapons, locations, Zone A, Zone B, different zones, where the confrontations will happen. Very detailed, even going as much detail as how many indigenous native Brits possess firearms from the days of farming and so forth, and how limited it would be for Muslims. And here specifically, they're talking about Muslims. That's what the crescent represents. Yes. So let me ask you, how realistic do you think? Because you go into X, and you've had even Elon Musk speak at Tommy's rally saying, look, war is coming, death is coming, and this narrative has become very much normalised.
Can we come back to, and we must come back to that question.
Sure.
But come back to, in simple terms, at present, I don't think it's realistic. But let's come back to that as a further discussion a bit later on. First of all, we need to go through the thing, because this point that this is no longer just a Zionist thing is really important, I believe. Not least, to be fair to ordinary Jews, apart from anything else. but also so we get it right. Because if we get this wrong, this is going to be really bad news for all of us.
So we're talking about the very special interest groups
Yes.
that will no doubt benefit from this type of scenario.
Yeah, indeed. And but there's one interest group which is above and beyond all the others, and no one has noticed, but I believe is there. So come on to this.
Yes,
this is so it's not just bets, but he's been allowed to carry on speaking in a way that he's a key employee of this government-funded operation, which is training Labour Party civil servants as well as officers at Sandhurst, and he's being allowed to run. But further than that, Sir Richard Kemp, Lieutenant General, who is a lot of your people will know is a spokesman, obviously, not just for the Zionist lobby, but also for the British upper echelons of the British military. Yeah. So he's been one of the chief cheerleaders for two things. One is the insane war and our support for it in Ukraine. And secondly, for the continued arming of the genocide in Gaza, right? But he is now also saying there's a civil war coming. So this is no longer just the Zionists. This is a serious section of the British deep state is saying the same thing. And then you think come back to Tommy, he's blatantly, obviously protected. If the British state was really thinking this man is actually potentially a serious problem, he wants to kick off a civil war, and one incident is, if not a civil war, it's certainly going to tear places apart. And, there'll be none of the past race or riots will be anything like what's coming if Tommy kicks off just a little bit of what he could do. So Tommy is protected. They could have locked him up for all sorts of things. Or they could simply go after him Al Capone style on the unpaid income tax on the vast sums of money he's now raking in. And they don't. So he's protected. So again, what on earth is the British state doing? These three men, sort of ciphers of it. Tommy, Kemp and Betts. Yeah. What are they doing letting this run? And the moment you get to the military side of the British state, it's like that with the United States, with the US deep state, obviously. So I don't believe this is something that's coming from the British state, certainly not a Labour state, because it does not compute at all. They're crazy, they're mad, they're dangerous, they're riddled with Zionists, etc., but they wouldn't want to tear Britain apart in a civil war. America, on the other hand, is a different matter. Now, people think, especially I'm sure your community is too sensible for this, but awful large numbers of Brits actually believe we've got a special relationship with the USA. so let's get this right, that the Americans didn't push the madness of the First World War on the peoples of Europe. We did that ourselves. But once it was running, there was huge parts of the British ruling class and the German ruling class who were desperate in 1916 for a peace deal. And partly the Balfour Declaration stopped that, but also American big business, the American deep state, was making so much money, the American banking system was making so much money out of the war, they wanted it to continue. And by the time the Americans came into the war in 1917, their key war aim was the destruction of the European empires. And by the end of the war, they destroyed, and it wasn't just the Germans, so the Kaiser Wilhelm's Imperial Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and what was left of the Ottoman Empire. It was also the Russian Empire, who were theoretically on their side. So they destroyed them. Then the Second World War, again, there's different groups pushed us towards the Second World War. When the World Zionist Organization's declaration of war against Germany in 1933, people will look at that. But if you really look at what's gone on, America, by supplying Britain with vast amounts of money, which we've only just finished paying back, and arms and all the rest of it, kept the war going with Lend-Lease. In fact, they kept Britain and Russia in the war. They kept it going till the whole of Europe had exhausted itself. We ended up having to decolonise our colonies, and I'm not a British imperialist. I'm not really shedding tears about it, nor do I think it was exclusively bad. But my family got nothing out of it, and the same with most Brits, in fact. But the Americans forced the decolonisation. You saw it finally with Suez. 56, the Americans, no, you're not going to do that. And quite apart from the big colonies with people in, they also, for 100 rusty destroyers, they took all Britain, the British Empire's scattered bases, the little islands and so on. So the key war aim of the United States in the Second World War was the destruction of the other European empires, the French, the Belgian and the British, and they succeeded. More recently, the whole Ukraine thing, yes, there's all sorts of reasons, but the key reason it's gone on is the United States is using it as a way of forcing Europe to commit suicide by Russia in economic and military terms. So the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline was not aimed at Russia, it was aimed at Germany. The sanctions don't really hurt Russia because under sanctions they've gone in for massive import substitution programs. It's helped Russia. But the sanctions are wrecking the economies of Germany, France, Italy and Britain because of the cost of energy and so on. So the target is us. And the reason for this is that as a multipolar world develops, or perhaps just a Chinese world, we don't yet know if it's going to be a multipolar world or a Chinese world.
Do you think we're here yet?
No, we're not there yet, but it's developing into a more multipolar world. And in particular, the section of the world that the dollar makes work. So the Americans print them, everyone else buys them, basically. It's the biggest, it's a huge scam going on since not long after the end of the Second World War. And the parts of the world where this operates are shrinking, which puts the dollar and the whole of the American political settlement, the stability of America, on the line.
Yeah, so Americano.
So the only way they can keep that going, if they're accepting that they're going to lose Africa and Southeast Asia and so on, all the rest of it, is at least to be absolutely the undisputed top dog in the Anglosphere and Western Europe, so their closest allies and so on. So how do you keep the dollar up relative to the euro and pound sterling? You force them down. Yes, so you keep us at war, so you force them down. But this isn't the whole thing. It's very clear, I think, that basically the American industrial deep state, which had done itself immense damage with shipping everything to China and so on, they've realised you cannot confront China, and they're convinced they have to confront China, perhaps with a degree of truth in that economically. You can't confront China unless you have serious industrial capacity at home. And so they've done a sort of deal with Trump whereby they've let this populist into power and run loose. And so with things like the tariffs, it's the only way you could rebuild American industry if you want to, and they clearly do. They've made a decision that America has to grow back industrially. But you don't build an industrial or rebuild an industrial society just with money and investment and a decision to buy local and to fight wars all over the place and build things up. You also need humans, you need people, you need skilled workers. And because the demographics of America are every bit as catastrophic as ours, yes, it's been concealed in recent years by floods of South American immigrants who, they're okay for picking stuff in the fields, they're okay for flipping burgers, but most of them aren't skilled engineers and they never will be. And furthermore, the American people have revolted against that in electoral terms. So that's sort of got to stop. But the only way that America can survive their coming catastrophe is if they find an extra 20 or 30 or 40 million skilled, assimilable immigrants.
Europeans.
Exactly. Now, so Trump...
Make the situation so bad in Europe that they come to America.
Exactly. So Trump a few weeks ago shut the door, at least for the time being, to
South African Boers.
To all immigrants except the South African Boers, for whom I have an enormous amount of sympathy, not least because that was one of the great crimes of British imperialism. A different story for another day, perhaps. But I don't think that's just sentimentality and the fact that Musk has a South African connection. It's a test run. It's to see this and to get the American people used to the idea that actually, we can have white immigrants. That's how America was built, with white settlers from Europe. And I think that, well, if Trump opened the door tomorrow, he won't do quite yet. First of all, he had to have a couple of years where a genuine labour shortage builds up, skilled labour shortage, which it will, because a large number of American engineers, for instance, are age 63 and about to retire or die in the next few years. So that's going to build up. When it's built up after a couple of years, he will start to open the doors to European immigration. But as you were saying, I think before we sat down, actually, that really it takes quite a lot before people actually want to leave their homeland. Because that's your natural place. The bones of your forefathers are there, your family are there, and so on. It takes a lot. So if they open the doors tomorrow, some skilled young white Europeans would go there, but not enough. The only way they can get the 30, 40 million that they need over the next 15 years, so they really do need them, believe me, having studied it. The only way to do that is to so destabilise Britain, France, Holland, all the rest of it, that they go there. So again, so who's going to do this? Well, again, everyone's looking. George Soros, he's the one, and his NGOs are indeed very heavily responsible for the flood of undocumented single males from all over the world into Europe. But like I said before, if you look at Soros, you don't realise it's the CIA behind that. So they brought in these huge numbers of extra people. So, and they've done this before. This is what they're doing is the destruction of the former Yugoslavia on a grand scale, where the CIA and their people basically they convince the Croats, we'll support you and we'll arm you. They convince the Serbs, yeah, you can win. They convince the Bosnian Muslims, you'll be all right, we'll arm you. All they wanted to do was to get people to go to war. Now, when the American deep state, through our own deep state, is trying to drive the British people mad against you lot, we're happy to go to war.
Why are they in unison? Why does, according to your theory, why is the British deep military state in entirely alignment with the American military deep state? Why can they not differ?
Because they've been part of the same thing for so long. It's basically, you say it's in a way it's not American or British. It's Atlanticist. They've all been to the same university. They've all had the same sort of indoctrination. It's two peas in a pod. They're very, very close. Now, Britain should have a military elite which is independent minded. If it suits us to work with America, we'd work with America. But it might not always suit us. But we haven't. We've got an elite, and I went to university with some of these people. I boxed with some of them. I meet some of them since, and they're all completely narrow-minded about this. They're convinced that Russia is a monstrous enemy, and that if we let them take the bits of Ukraine where they speak Russian, next week they'll be trampling through the streets of London with snow on their boots. They're mad as hatters. They really are, and they're completely in this belief that the Americans can do no wrong, and we've all got to stand together.
What do those elite, those guys that you went to university with or boxed with, and if any other conversation, I'm sorry to digress, what's their views on Islam and the Muslim world and the Caliphate and stuff like this?
That's a very interesting question. They are nothing like as hostile as ordinary people are. Nothing like as much. They're quite sophisticated and so on and so forth, and they're quite convinced that racism and unreasonable prejudice is wrong. They're
ideologically, where would you put them?
Ideologically, well, they're hysterical against Iran. Absolutely so. But they would regard the United Arab Emirates increasingly. It looks as though Saudi Arabia is coming round. It's becoming a reasonable. They're moderating and reforming Islam, just as we reform Christianity, and we've thrown it away really. But we sort of still. So
those are the type of states. So those are the type of states they'll favour.
They're the states that they favour, and they believe that basically the primitive backward states like Afghanistan and Pakistan and so on, they'll come around that way in the end. It's a matter of if one day if they make enough money somehow or other, it'll all get sorted out that way. But they're quite happy with those sellout Muslim states. They don't regard them as a problem, and immigration into Britain isn't their problem because it doesn't affect their communities or anything like that.
Are you basically saying that the American deep state, your theory is at least that perhaps previously it was the bankers, it's the Zionist lobby, but you're saying it's actually something a bit more deeper and bigger than that?
I'm saying they're still there. So the Zionists are still pushing for this trouble just in order to make people want to go and fight Iran and keep on funding Israel and supporting Israel. The big capitalism just favours immigration, and the banks have to have immigration because otherwise the whole system collapses. So they're there. But this is now an extra factor. And I don't know how long it's been going on for. It might have been going on for a long time. It's only become really obvious. But I think that especially the Betts and the Kemp thing.
Kemp, Tommy.
Yeah, this is something really quite... Tommy's been at it for the Zionists for a long time. But I think this is now something beyond that. It's since they've had Trump, since they accepted Trump. It's a point. There's also, because no elite is 100% just one monolithic thing. So coming back to the American elite, you had a section of it, especially the Zionist stroke, the Jewish multimillionaires side, which was particularly hostile to Russia because their great-great-grandparents were chased out of the Pale, and they've got all these family stories about persecution and all the rest of it. So they've always hated Christians, but Russians in particular. So they are the ones who were pushing for confrontation with Russia, for the removal of Putin, regime change, turn Russia back into a Western quarry, basically, which it was under Yeltsin. And for a long time, they dominated. Kissinger was one of the ones that say, well, no, not sure about this, because actually China's the long-term threat, and this was a mistake to push this economic superpower and a military superpower together, and we should have tried to split them and keep them apart. That's the sensible thing. So who do we pick? And Trump now represents the section which has decided we don't like the Russians, but we can do a sort of deal with them and wean them back, because in the end there is potentially a clash between Russia and China over the Far Eastern territories and so on. Certainly if China hadn't had a suicidal birth policy, then there'd be a huge problem. But in any case, there's still a problem. So it's realistic-ish for them to think if we can wean Russia away, then we've got more chance of dealing with China. So I think that that's the faction that has now won. But as I say, to deal with China, you have to rebuild American industry. To rebuild American industry, you have to deal with a demographic disaster. And the only way to do it, in terms of skilled people who the American people would accept, because if you brought 30 million Hindus in, which is Elon Musk is that...
The H-1B visa was... Yeah. I mean, Elon Musk supports that.
Yes, he supports that. But if you brought 30 million in, the Americans would vote you out very rapidly. Yeah, they simply couldn't do that. But they've all got, as you know, either English or German or Italian or Polish surnames, so they would far more readily accept European immigration. But if they were picking, they say, right, the doors are open to anyone who's either got a university degree in something useful, not media studies, or an apprenticeship, or just a proper skill, or 2 young children. The doors are open. They could afford to say, you know what, when we come in, we will give you $250,000 as a loan to set up a business. And if at the end of 10 years you're paying taxes and you've got 3 children, we'll write it off. Yeah. They could do that very easily, and I think that is where they're going. I mean, but to do it, they've got to wreck Europe.
What then does that do to the notion of this special friendship? Because you see on X, everyone tags Trump and Musk as if they will save Europe. We've literally seen people call for Trump's direct intervention
to become our president.
To become president.
Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, I think if they get their way and they really kick off a lot of trouble, and even without that, I mean the deindustrialization of Britain and Europe, the destruction of our energy structure, deliberate sabotage of it, that's got plenty of potential to cause chaos in its own right, quite apart from winding up people that hate Muslims and vice versa. If they get it, there's then a further benefit to the new United States industrial bloc that when you've wrecked a country, you've got to rebuild it.
And you'd be the one.
So you lend them money and you lend it and say, okay, well, we'll lend you this money, but you've got to give us some security. So we'll have this, that, and the other. So it's a giant asset stripping thing. One more thing must coming back to Paul Marshall and GB News. Mm. The financial side of his business, the thing they specialise in is the purchase of distressed assets. So this is with big companies which are in real trouble. And their business model is finding really worthwhile assets which are distressed and buying them up dirt cheap and then putting them right. Now, there's nothing in terms of distressed assets which would compare to London, the whole of it, if they managed to produce this pitchfork versus crescent thing. And one of the deep, most sinister thing in Betsy's business is he says, actually, you don't have to go steaming into Tower Hamlets with, guns and all the rest. You leave them there and you commit what he calls herbicide.
Yes.
And he says that very small numbers of people simply, and in his first set of lectures, he actually produced a map showing where you would have to destroy the electricity network to plunge the cities into darkness, which, as you know, would produce hell in many large cities. Now, if any poor 17-year-old autistic kid who thinks he's a Nazi was found with that in his bedroom, he'd be in prison for 4 or 5 years. Material likely to be used to a terrorist organisation.
Bess talks about this on Big Podcast.
Bess has done it. Bang, like that. So his idea of herbicide, it may well be way off the mark. But if they can persuade a few people to try it, it'll certainly cause all sorts of trouble. So you asked before, do I think this is realistic?
Yeah.
Not at the moment. It really is a hard push. I speak to a small but significant number of Muslims, and I simply haven't come across it. I hitched with one of my eldest grandsons all the way across England at the tail end of the summer holidays. Lad of 13. We hitched from the Welsh border to the Suffolk coast. Great fun. And we met two members of ethnic minorities, gave us lifts. Yeah. One was a Tamworth-born Sikh. The other was a second-generation West Indian from London, both of whom were reform supporters in a big way. Taught serious politics with three of the others, one of whom was a second-generation Italian, but regarded himself as English. The other two were Brits. And each of them said, they're all looking at these flags, it's great to see. 3 out of 15 lifts said there's a civil war coming. So the only ones who commented on said, yeah, we're talking about that. Out of all the lifts, only one was a liberal. Young white girl who'd never stopped for anyone before, and obviously granddad and grandson, she picked us up. So there's a feeling it could happen, but it's still a hugely long shot, not least because you people don't want it. Yeah, I've no doubt about that. No. I don't know what you would say. It strikes me as an outsider that I would have expected the whole Gazan thing to produce a resurgence of domestic terrorism and real radicalisation. Yeah. And it hasn't done, has it?
No, it has radicalised, but not to the same way it's manifested in a violent... Yeah,
exactly so. So there's something different. And apart from anything else, the birth rate thing is changing. So there's not so much push and pressure. And in the end, I guess also that when you consider there are things which can bring our communities together, like the LGBT thing, it's an attack on your kids as well as my grandchildren. So I think it's very hard to push for. But having said that, two things. First of all, I spent an awful lot of time for years in Northern Ireland, toing and froing. I've spoken to people who were there at the very start of the Troubles. And they all say the same thing from both communities, that before the Troubles in 1968, yes, there were tensions, and their grandparents had been in each other's throats and so on. But they lived in mixed streets, and there was never any issue, apart from the month around the main marching season with the Protestant marching bands. At that point, Protestant and Catholic ladies would stop going to each other's houses to borrow a cup of sugar, the old working class thing. But apart from that, there was no issue. Gerry Adams, in his autobiography, says that when he was a lad, they used to sit on the wall and watch the Orange Parades come past. It's just part of standard entertainment. When I was in the Territorial Army, we were taken to the Royal Anglians Museum. Mm-hmm. And they showed us one of the things was a World War I 303 rifle that had been taken off the IRA. I think it's the Short Strand. It's a small piece of Catholic nationalist Belfast surrounded by Protestant mobs, basically. And this rifle had been owned by a man on the Western Front in the First World War. He's been the luckiest soldier in the British Army because he pulled the trigger on his rifle and his bullet was halfway down the muzzle when a German bullet came precisely in the muzzle the opposite way.
That's crazy.
And it had blown up the barrel like this, and they'd hammered it back a bit and wound wire around it, and they used that to defend their area. So you put those things together, and there's no question that the division between Pakistani communities and their white neighbours in places like Burnley and Blackburn and so on is far more extreme and distrustful and already segregated and separated than the working class communities were in Northern Ireland at the start of the Troubles. So already a long way there. And for that matter, you know perfectly well all the criminal gangs in Britain have got far better weaponry than a 303 rifle that's had a bullet explode in it. So there's trouble like that. The other thing is that when I was younger, I spent 2 summer holidays teaching foreign students English, including large numbers. This was in the very early 90s. These were youngsters who'd grown up in Tito's Yugoslavia, who'd been part of the explosion of all the trouble and then come through the other side. And there was a turnover of different groups every 3 weeks. So I spoke to loads of them. They all said the same thing, that when they were like youngish teenagers, they go to parties and no one asked, are you a Serb or Orthodox? Are you a Catholic? Are you a Muslim? What are you? They said no one asked. One, it didn't occur to us. 2, it would have been rather rude. But we were completely desegregated, completely integrated. And it never occurred to us. And they said, you might think of us like it was a Soviet Union type thing. They said, it wasn't. It was a modern Western society, just the same as yours. So we had all the latest things, in those days, the latest things, they had cassette recorders and so on. And all of them said we were a totally integrated society. And we thought that all those hatreds were something from the distant past. And the CIA and co came in and tore it apart, partly because they didn't want to have the former Yugoslavia existing, because it was a very strange state. It showed that you don't have to be either communist or capitalist. It was a sort of socialist side, third way state, and hence an immense danger. So it had to be torn apart. But I believe that Britain has got far more tensions and problems that can be worked on to cause trouble than either Northern Ireland had, or particularly the former Yugoslavia. So they could do it. If it was just a handful of crazy ultra Likud crackpots funding Tommy, no. But when you've got a big section of the British state wants it as well, it has to be a possibility, and it would be a catastrophe. The one final thing on this, of course, that they're trying to make the British people think, look, you're going to win this. If you're going to, you wouldn't remotely think of starting a civil war if you thought we're not going to win this. So just trying to make them think they can win it is a very aggressive thing. As a matter of fact, I have very little doubt that we wouldn't win it, and nor would you. It'd be just like Northern Ireland, because I don't think it'll be... Betts has a model. He's asked, what would the casualty figures be? And he said it would be somewhere between Northern Ireland type low-level insurgency and the former Yugoslavia. So if it's at the Northern Ireland scale, then when you scale up the tiny population in Northern Ireland to the mainland Britain, you'd end up with 20,000 dead a year. That's how bad it was. If it's at the Yugoslavia end, it's 4% of the entire population. He said it's somewhere between the two. But I think it's probably less. I don't think it would get to that. But you can certainly see from the riots we had last year and so on, they weren't against Muslims. They weren't against the Muslim community. They were specifically against people, regardless of what they are, like the Southport killer, who've been brought in and foisted on us and all the rest of it. Just non-whites and criminals, and particularly bad criminals at that. But once you get that sort of trouble, it's very, very easy for it to spark and roll far further.
You sent out guidance, didn't you, at the time? You gave out some piece of advice to patriots to stay away from the mosques.
Just stay away from mosques, because they'll be heavily defended by fellas who want to protect the mosque, or at the very least, because of the minicabs and all the rest of it, they can pull together a serious crew very, very quickly. And if you go there, you're probably going to die. And in any case, this is not about mosques. This is a quarrel between us, the British people, and our elite over what they're doing. It'd be enormously helpful if your people would say, okay, some of these people coming in may be Muslims, but really, we don't need this many people. We certainly don't need people who are driving the British people mad with fear, worry and anger, because it's not in your interests.
Would it be fair, whilst acknowledging that Muslims equally highlight a more deeper and fundamental point, is that maybe we should consider stop bombing and destabilizing these countries to make them unlivable places, because no one wants to leave their home willingly.
Yes.
If we look at the top 4 countries that are coming illegally via boats, Afghanistan, Iran, Sudan, Syria, Eritrea, those 5 countries. Out of the 5, 4 are Muslim majority. Those 4, what's the common denominator they have in common?
Yeah, they will
war sanctions.
War and sanctions.
War and
absolutely
sanctions,
so.
Right?
Yeah. No, I would say, just as the Muslim community in Britain could still defuse this by making more of a thing of saying we really do reject the grooming thing and all the rest of it, and were to say, look, actually Britain is rather full and it's not in anyone's interest to carry on this, something approaching an open door policy. And at the same time, my community should also be saying, look, if we don't want all these people coming, we've got to stop wrecking their countries. Absolutely. That's the case. So there's an onus on us in terms of morality and common sense, because otherwise there is this risk that this utterly wicked plot to drive us to war will at least work at a certain level. As I was saying, it wouldn't even have to end up in a really serious, disastrous shooting war. Just a few actual pogrom-type riots, of which the British are now capable. They weren't 3 years ago. They are now. It was the trouble up in Oldham in 2001. That was Stoke City fans. That's not the average Brit. But they are now capable of that. And if they kick off that sort of trouble, or even something more severe, I know what's going to happen, at the end of about 30 years, with at least thousands buried, dead, and many, many lives wrecked and so on, and the fighting men on both sides being dominated by psychotic criminal scum, because that's what happens in wars like that. At the end of that, probably when the Americans are saying, well, actually, we can now make more money rebuilding this, they'll pay the criminal scum on both sides to calm down. They'll have some kind of peace. We'll then end up with a thoroughly balkanised Britain. And, that's not in anyone's interest. Now, in a certain way, as an ethno-nationalist, I haven't got a problem with a balkanised Britain. I don't want my grandchildren marrying your grandchildren. And probably vice versa, because you then got a problem with all the religious questions and all the rest of it.
If they become Muslim, they can marry my grandchildren.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you. From our point of view, no, we do not want that, and it ain't going to happen.
It's happening.
It happens in little bits and pieces. Equally, I know you wouldn't want to acknowledge it, some Muslims convert to Christianity. More Muslims, especially women, are just becoming westernized.
Yeah, that's happening.
So it's happening.
This is from today, from a recent...
Global wars draw Britons to Islam. Yeah,
the numbers of whites are still high.
It's certainly going on. You would expect some white converts to Islam because, as you said earlier, whites are the biggest majority. So of course,
well, the current number is about 350,000. The current number is 350,000 white British Muslims.
Yeah.
Okay.
That to me is deeply disturbing, and it's wholly wrong. This is fundamentally a Christian country, and my people should remain Christian. So because of where we are now, we can't have remigration. The remigration thing is a nonsense.
Why are you so strong against that?
Well, because it can't.
Because it can't. The notion of it being a reality.
Because it can't happen as a reality. Because to have it, you would have to have state power. That's the first thing. You can't get it by begging the same elite which brought all these people in to suddenly admit they were wrong and reverse it.
The likes of Steve Laws and Christian Zuma think it can happen.
Well, some of them because they're very stupid. Yeah. But the ones pushing it know perfectly well that they won't. So several things are going on here. It's the idea that we're going to get it makes them more aggressive and more pushy. Having all these people shout about it is supposed to make the immigrant communities, but particularly the Muslims, feel uncertain and worried and thereby inclined to radicalism. So it's benefiting them in all these regards. It also wastes the time of the Brits by giving them the idea that there's an easy solution, because it's a magic wand. You wave the wand, they all go away. It's not going to happen, because we're going to end up in a more balkanised society. And even if we don't get this civil war thing, it's inevitable we end up in a more balkanised society.
So you think that's happening?
Yeah, it's happening anyway. And again, one of the things that Bet says, which I'm sure is true, is that a multiracial society where one side is hugely in the majority is fundamentally stable, because they're secure and the minority is so small they know they've got to behave. A multicultural society where everyone is a minority, as long as there's sort of checks and balances and things are stable, that can also work. He says the friction, the danger point, is when you get this switch. So particularly from a group who've been the majority, suddenly find that they're not the majority any longer, and they get very, very scared. It's just the way it is. And that's where we're heading, obviously, with the Brits. So we are going to end up as a minority. Now, these crazy Steve Laws and all the rest of it, it's a sort of it's a black pill doom thing. We become a minority, it's all over. It's finished. We'll end up like the Boers. We'll be murdered in our beds. The Muslims will, take everything and cut all our heads off and all the rest of it. And the simple fact is that we are going to be the largest minority it's hard to call it a nation, but in a society of minorities. That's just going to be a different way of being. And it's not an easy thing to make work. We've got no choice but to try to make it work. And the best thing that can make it work is to undo the problem we're getting to now, that the former majority are becoming very, very uncertain, unsure, and scared of the future. They're disorganised. If you have a well-organised, coherent people who are prepared to stand up for their rights and insist it's not a matter of being a respectable people. We don't want to be respectable, but we need to be respected. Now, at present, why on earth would someone from the Muslim community respect British society? Because it's a cesspit. And the people, many of them, are utter trash. So why would you respect that? But if you go to Northern Ireland and look how the white working class behave there in the loyalist area, you've seen it yourself. You respect those people, because if you don't respect them, they are going to kick your ass because they've got the capability to. They don't want to. And the Catholics and the Protestants, well, for 300 or 400 years, the Protestants were a minority in Ireland. They weren't exterminated. There were efforts to exterminate them, but they fought back. They survived. From 1922 until a few years ago, the Catholics were a minority in Northern Ireland. They weren't exterminated or driven out. Some of the prods wanted to. It can't be done. So now the loyalists are a minority. So by the logic of the remigration or we're going to die people, the loyalists now should be running to Glasgow because they're finished because they're a minority. No, they're not. The fact they're a minority actually makes their community stronger and more cohesive because they feel under a sort of pressure. So therefore they want more flags, more of the kids join the bands and all the rest of it. And most importantly of all, at the band parades, young loyalist boy meets young loyalist girl, and within a couple of years she's pregnant, and that's it. So the numbers carry on. So we could have peace potentially between our different communities, but particularly when the British stop either putting their heads in the sand or coming up with fantasy solutions like remigration and set about organising our communities so that they have a cohesion and a pride and they're not scared of anyone. They don't need to be aggressive towards anybody. So my particular problem with remigration is, as a concept, is that because it's not possible, persuading people that's all you got to do, ask for that, means we're not doing the serious work of organising our community. And that's what I want my people to do. And then we can at least try to put something peaceful together for the long term. And I think in the long term, so now I have to go wishful thinking. My long-term vision for this, I want Britain to go back to being overwhelmingly an indigenous British Christian society.
A white
British, yes. But it can't happen until Afghanistan is actually somewhere where all the young people of Afghan origin in Britain think, you know what, I'd love to go back there. And if I go back there, and perhaps if I bought a house here some years ago, my grandparents did, I've now inherited it. If I sell that and go to Afghanistan, I can set up a business, I can do this, can have a great life in a country with my people and with my faith and without this friction with the neighbours. So I think that is possible because we're moving away and nothing can be done to stop this now. Putin ain't got it right when he talked about the golden billion. This is basically the white world with the Japs and so on thrown in as well. The people who've dominated the finance, the economy of the world for now several hundred years. It's finished. It's over. Doesn't mean we're going to die or starve to death or whatever. It's just that other countries are going to become more important economically and so on. We become a backwater. You must have come across young Muslims that you know who just are desperate to move to Dubai.
Yeah, there's so many of them.
Yeah, there's so many of them. So I think probably Dubai and Qatar, they're rather too small to take all Britain's Muslims. Yeah. But by extrapolation, okay, that's special because they got the oil money and they've done deals with the Zionists.
We spoke about this before. When our motherlands are safe and stable to go back to, and that there's no threat of an invasion or drone attacks, we will naturally go back.
People will naturally go back.
People will naturally go back there, and it's a bit linked to the conversation we had off camera when I asked you how many Islamists do you actually think are coming on those boats. There is no reason for an Afghan Islamist to come to Britain because the Taliban's in power. There's no reason for a Syrian Islamist to come to the UK because Ahmad al-Shara is in power.
Yes.
There's no reason for an Iranian Islamist to come into power because Ayatollah's in power.
Some of them, if you've been a criminal in a country which is basically dominated by imposed Western values, it's fairly safe being a criminal.
Yeah.
You don't want to be a criminal in a Sharia state.
Yeah, well, you
get your hand cut off, whatever.
Yeah,
so therefore, come here. If you are inclined to be a rapist, you don't go raping women in an all-Muslim country because you're going to be dead.
Yeah.
Probably most painfully, I guess. Come here, it's better. So we're getting. But I agree with you. It's very unlikely that they're Islamist extremists, unless you go down the line that they hate us so much that they're putting in sleepers and all the rest of it. But I don't think so. I don't think so.
So let's just talk a bit about the balkanized Britain.
Yeah.
So do you think this is going to happen regardless, sooner or later?
It'll happen. It's a natural thing. Yes, there'll be merging at some edges, but overall you end up with a greater tribalisation and stricter lines between the communities and so on. And it's happening already with people just moving away. A friend of mine's involved in social housing and housing in Leicester. He said that for some years now, it's not just the whites moving out, it's also the Hindu and Muslim areas. It's Hindus in Muslim areas are moving to the Hindu areas, and Muslims in the Hindu areas are moving. And amongst the minority communities, it's mainly done in terms of they own their own houses. It's just sales and where they buy. Amongst the social housing, so these are the lower levels and a lot more of the whites, it's actually organised by way of just quiet exchanges. So Leicester, one of Britain's most multicultural, diverse cities and so on, is fragmenting more and more into different communities. It's a natural thing. But again, looking at how much trouble can this cause, one of the first signs that Northern Ireland was heading for real trouble was precisely this same separation of communities. Without any trouble, without any big hoo-ha and shouting about it, this separation of communities was happening in the 1960s, middle 60s, before the troubles actually kicked off. So it's a sort of warning on a weather map that there is trouble. So when these people are trying to create a civil war, they are, I won't say they're pushing an open door, as saying some of it's speculation, it's verging on nonsense. But there is the potential for them to cause a lot of trouble.
So just in this time that we've spoken about foreign wars, we've spoken about different special interest groups, we've spoken about the fact that you would be politically naive to just blame everything on the Zionist lobby or a group of powerful Jews or something like that. In fact, the issues that we're experiencing is multifaceted with different players. So which then brings me back to the question which we kind of addressed early on, is who's behind all this and who is benefiting from it? Is it the various special interest groups? On the one hand, you have the military-industrial complex, you have the Zionist pro-Israel lobby, you have the deep American and British state, the military, you have the capitalists and the economists. You've got various different players here. Yeah. But who benefits ultimately from a fragmented Britain and a fragmented Europe? Are you still maintaining that it is the American deep state potentially? It's
the Zionists from a political point of view. There is this problem amongst particularly the Talmudists, not the Torah Jews, but the Talmudists, with a religious book. They complain about the Quran, but read the Talmud. It's blood curdling against non-Jews and against Jesus Christ and so on. So there is a problem with that as well, and those people just hate Europe and hate the Christian nations of Europe because we expelled the Jews a long time ago and so on. So they do not represent most Jews. So people with that sort of mindset and Zionist mindset are prosecuting me now. They need a Nick Griffin, they need a radical Muslim, because in the end they're a so-called charity, but it's a fundraising operation. And I'm their stock in trade.
I was talking about campaigning against anti-Semitism.
The campaign against anti-Semitism and Muslims as well, that they come up with a figure that a lot of people in their community either hate or are potentially scared of, somewhere or another, and basically give us lots of money and we'll protect you from them. It's a protection racket. It's basically like a mafia. It's quite a good parallel, that you can criticise the mafia, which in America it's a different matter, but in Italy and so on, the mafia was Italian. To criticise the mafia is not anti-Italianism, because the first victims of the Italian mafia were the Italian people themselves, because it's a protection racket and a criminal entity. And the first victims of both the Zionists and what I would call political Judaists, same line, you can get the crazed Christian Zionists, the political jihadists, so political Islamists. So their community has the same thing. And they have a vested interest in this because it gives them money, it gives them power, it herds their people towards them. So they want trouble. So there's them. But then there's also, as I say, the interests of capitalism in favour of mass immigration, but also war. You know, bankers have always funded both sides of war. It's one of the main growth things. It destroys current material wealth, and it all has to be rebuilt. So it's tremendous. So they benefit from that. And as I say, I'm sure now that the American deep state very clearly is at war with Europe and with Britain. And I think that of late, since Trump, they've also now decided that this division is also in their favour, because if you can wreck it all, you get the quality labour that they need by the million, skilled labour, and finally you get to rebuild it, the sort of giant Marshall Plan, and everyone in Europe is paying them tribute for the next 80, 90 years, as we had been after the Second World War. It's good for the American deep state. Again, I'm not for one moment there just saying it's the American people. Because again, the first victims of the Washington Wall Street sort of alliance were the Confederate States, particularly. Yeah, so they started with them, and then they rolled on from there. So it's in the end, I suppose it's all the elites. Man is wolf to man, and once you have that much power and wealth, you want more of it. And I think, one more overall factor. I think that there is a spiritual element to this thing. All this is pure evil. It's actually satanic. Evil does exist as a real force in the world. Satanists exist, and Satan exists as a real force.
The existence of evil is the proof of God.
Yes. And obviously they hate God. So, and destroying human life, whether it's through abortion or war, it's a sacrifice. It's something for Satan. And I think that's so. Whoever it is, whether it's the Zionist lobby or the political Judaists or the bankers or capitalism or the Steve Law, the Nazi types, all these people are used by evil. They're just a human tool for evil. And especially if you look a little bit ahead, another reason that in the end we all need to stand together is that the transhumanist elite, of whom Klaus Schwab has been the best example, and Musk too. But Schwab and the World Economic Forum they've done an enormous amount to push for the deindustrialization in the modern world. Which, bucolically, it might be lovely if we all went back to like the 18th century and we're all farming, and there's milkmaids, and all the rest of it. That's lovely. But billions of people would starve to death. So it's too late to go back to that. But these people are actually systematically destroying the means of keeping a modern society going. And huge numbers of people are going to die as a consequence at some time down the line. But if you trace it back, and lots of Brits looked at during the COVID business, were looking at Klaus Schwab. Well, it's a Germanic name. He must be a Jew. He's a Jew, Klaus Schwab. Because he wasn't. His father was a key figure in the Nazi war machine. He was the managing director of a company which made equipment for the heavy water plant in Norway, which was the basis of the Nazi atom bomb. There's no possibility they would have had a Jew in a central position in that. So, and the people that Schwab first got involved with were Italian industrialists, not even Americans, not Jews, Italian industrialists. And this thing, in the end, was created by and is funded by the Rockefellers. And the Rockefellers are an inconvenient people for the actual anti-Semites. Say, again, it's a German name. They must be Jewish. No, they weren't. They were Southern Baptists. Yep. They're Christians who the devil makes work for idle hands. They're enormously idle. They're enormously wealthy, and they became enormously dangerous. And the GovCore global technocracy that they want to build, they've got no place for you and me or anyone watching this. They genuinely believe that they're on the point of leaving God behind and moving from Homo sapiens to Homo Deus, yep. the God-man, who will actually be the next stage of evolution. And instead of God creating things, or if you insist as a liberal, nature creating things, man creates a new super being, which is part man and part intelligent machine. I mean, it's a monstrous thing. It's quite clearly, it's quite clearly Luciferian, if not absolutely satanic. And in the end, I think that is the greatest danger that all of us face. And if they have us fighting over our petty squabbles and the fact that I really don't like the idea of white people converting to Islam, and you really don't like the idea of Brits blaming you for grooming and all the rest of it, if we're focused on those little things, these people will make slaves or worse of our children.
You know, when you try to enact or replicate the attributes of God, this is already, you're on a dangerous path.
Yes, absolutely.
So trying to take the ability to create and give life and intelligence and so forth, any movement, any ideology, any worldview, which transhumanism, a huge element of it is that. Yeah. I pray to God and I'm confident that it will fail. I'm
sure it'll fail because it's so unnatural and twisted and perverse. And in the end,
it will fail.
God makes traps for these people, and they fall into or they dig traps for other people, and they fall into them. We know this. I'm sure it will fail. The question is how much damage it will do to ordinary human lives as it does fail. And as a father and a grandfather, that horrifies me. It's a very frightening thing, but we must stand against it.
Bringing the podcast to a close, what would your message be to white Brits, Englishmen, Scotsmen, Welshmen, Irishmen, who could be tempted by subscribing to the version of nationalism which Tommy Robinson et al. Are basically pushing to them? What advice would you give to...
There's no one out there who's going to come and save you. That there are very strange and dark times coming on us. The only way we cannot stop the fall of the old society. It's going to collapse around us. The only question or thing we have to do is to help our people to endure it and come out the other side, as intact and decent people with the best parts of our culture and so on. So stop hoping that someone else is going to come and save you and take responsibility for your own lives. Have children, rear them right, make communities, stop looking with what is actually deep down a degree of jealousy against other communities who still have faith and cohesion and so on, and rediscover your own, and stop being afraid of them, because the only reason they could possibly threaten you is if it's just you and you're divided and you don't know where you're going. And if you actually stand with your own people and become a respected people, then all the others will respect us, and that'll be fine, because then we might not like them, but we can live side by side until the long term, when one day, as things have changed and the economies of the world have changed and so on, they will want to go back to their homelands. And it's then the more we can do to make those homelands safe and decent and not be bombed, the quicker it'll happen. And one day we must have a peace deal. It's not just between the Muslims and the Christians, actually. It's a peace deal between the white nations, the old colonies, and the rest of the world as well, whereby we disentangle the things that shouldn't be tangled together. And certainly the Christian God, specifically, is rather different from Muslims. God appointed the separate nations with the destruction of the Tower of Babel. He made the separate nations, and he made the separate races. And to mix them up, it's destroying the work of God. The same as aborting a baby is destroying the work of God. So we have to stop doing that and one day build a world where we have good fences between us, but across the fences we can be good neighbours.
My final question to you was, and this is actually me personally asking you this, I was thinking about it last night, I was thinking, how am I going to close the podcast? What am I going to ask Nick? What didn't I get to ask him the first time, which I'm going to ask him this time round, given that this conversation has been a tad more relaxed than the last time? My final question to you is, when you reflect back at your years in politics, being the icon, the poster boy, the face of the British far right, or as they call it, the real right, whatever you want to coin it, up to the point of now, up to the point of today, us sitting down having this conversation right now, do you reflect back on those years with any regret? Question number one. And question number two, do you think that you were a force that was a net good, a net positive to the political right, or a net bad?
I particularly regret an overemphasis on elections, because we had such resources by standards of nationalism in terms of manpower, goodwill and money, that we could have done more to develop a lawfare capability to fight back, especially against the Zionist lawfare capability, and against things such as flying LGBT flags from police stations. It's a symbolic thing, but it's an important thing. We should have stopped that years ago, because it actually, in many ways, the liberal elite breached their own equality laws and discriminate against straight people and all the rest of it. So we should have gone in more for lawfare instead of elections, without a shadow of a doubt, and we should have gone into more community organisation, even if just experimentally for the time being. So that was to a degree, a misallocation of resources. Got carried away with that. It's mission creep. Once you start, this is part of the problem with, say, elections. Once you start doing it, it's very difficult to stop. You get carried away. So I regret that. Was it a force for good? I would say that
Net
good. Yes, I would say so, because it opened up, before we were there, basically there was a conspiracy of silence on immigration, on the grooming issue, which was utterly poisoning relations, utterly creating an immense amount of hatred. And especially as the historic stuff still goes through the courts, it's still doing it. And getting it out into the open and spoken about, and the whole immigration thing, I think was a net benefit, because if it's all bottled up, it's really going to explode. And in particular, there's no doubt that the BBC, in order to stop me and the British National Party, promoted Nigel Farage and UKIP to such an extent that we ended up with Brexit. Now, Brexit is a half-assed, it's a mess of a thing. We haven't really had a proper Brexit, but still it interfered with the United Socialist States of Europe. And I've been there at the heart of the thing. It's a pretty poisonous thing, Brussels and Strasbourg. So Britain is better off out of that, even though we haven't had anything like the benefits we should have done. And then beyond that, that in turn has led to now reform being there. And it's not going to change anything significantly, but it's breaking up the old political order. And this old Lib Con Uniparty was a huge block on any possible worthwhile change in the future. I think if we get a reform government, probably only one thing worthwhile might come out of it. Which is that at present, you can set up a Muslim charity, a Pakistani charity, you can have a Polish one, you can have all sorts of charities for anything you want. You cannot have a charity for the English, or any section of the English, or the British, in fact, anything indigenous.
Really?
You can't have it. You certainly can't have it if you call it white, but you needn't call it that. You can't have this. Now, as we get more into a nation of minorities, every minority has to be on a level playing field and have the same rights. And if you don't, you're going to have terrible trouble. So I believe that it's such an unfair, your reaction, really? It's so unfair and ludicrous.
Really?
That it's,
So you can't have a charity set up?
You can't set up a charity for the English. You can't have something, if you set up a charity, say in Oldham, you couldn't have a charity. If you had a charity for just the certain bits of the community which are ours, then you'd get attacked and taken down because it's
the charity commission.
Yep,
really?
Yep, because it's discriminating against the Muslims, despite the fact you can have your own charities, and that creates so much hatred. And then you get the blame. It's not your fault. It's the charity commission. It's the liberal elite. So we've got to put that right. And if it's so clearly wrong that I believe that if we end up with a reform government, that Farage wouldn't do it because he's not interested in the poor working class anyway. But someone could just bring forward a private member's bill, and just for that, to put this right, to give us the right to have charities, to have self-association, to, if we want to set up a business which is for our people, that's absolutely fine. Everyone should have that right. Once we have that, we then have the tools that we need to organise within our community, so that we do feel secure and we are respected. And I think that if we got nothing else out of a reform government, we would get that, because at a certain level, it's such a small thing to ask. It's so difficult for them as sort of, right-wing populists to resist. We would get it. And everything I'm looking at in terms of what my people need to move into and thrive and work in this new world we're going to be in relies on us being able to organise these things for ourselves. So if that's all we get out of the reform government, it's all we need. And it's only possible because we could have a reform government because we had Brexit, because we had Farage boosted by the BBC, and that was in order to stop the British National Party. So, yeah, absolutely, it was a net good.
What would you say to those from the Patriot spectrum who may watch this podcast and say, Nick, you've accepted defeat. You're a defeatist. You're not aiming high.
Lots of them say that. Lots of them say that.
Yeah.
I would say that it befits adult men, especially men who think they're massively superior from a massively superior people. It befits them to be realistic. And rather than being children writing a letter to Father Christmas, which is where you are when you're talking for migration and all this, oh, we'll drive them into the sea, blah, blah, blah. It's simply not realistic. And they're actually the defeatist ones, because the whole thrust is we must have remigration now, or we're going to become a minority and we'll all end up like the Boers, we're all going to die. And I'm saying absolutely not, because things tend to sort of even out. And as long as our people are organised, we can be a minority. We will not be, no one's going to exterminate us. We're not going to drive you into the sea. You're not going to make a mess of us either. No possibility. So, no, I'm not the defeatist. They're the defeatists by having this thing which is so terrible that the only way you can deal with it is to have a magic wand and pretend you're going to wave the magic wand. So now I'm wholly realistic, and I'm not in the least bit defeatist, because I can see a way out at the end of this, as we discovered, where we stay, we've got to live in the same place and, deal together and all the rest of it, but we stay essentially separate in our communities, and we do our thing and you do your thing. And one day, because the world circumstances have changed and we do, our elites finally stop wrecking your world, which they will stop it, because the collapse that is coming because of purely demographic reasons, apart from America, no one is going to get out of that. So everything has to change. And at the end of that change, we will go back to having our Britain. And there might be some members of ethnic minorities still here, but the numbers will be sufficiently diminished. It'll be absolutely obvious that there's no threat, no problem. And at that stage, I don't think anyone would have any trouble with it. We have to decolonise the entire world.
Nick, look forward to part 3, whenever that is. I hope it happens within 2 years.
I hope so.
But it was great having you back on. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very
Sisters, friends, I hope you all thoroughly enjoyed this part 2 with Nick Griffin. But do remember, you can also find in all the major audio platforms. And if you do end up seeing it on YouTube, don't be cheeky. Do remember to click subscribe to the 5 Pillars YouTube channel. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.